The wagon will snap just after sundown. Clara Whitfield heard it before she felt it. A crack like a rifle shot, then the whole world tilted sideways. The trunk behind her slid. Her daughter screamed, and the horse, spooked and tired, dragged the broken wagon another 20 feet before it finally gave up and stood there, trembling in the middle of nowhere. Montana Territory, October 1888. No town in sight, no lantern light, just wind moving through dead grass, and the first stars pushing through a sky the color of a bruise. Clara climbed down on shaking legs. Her boots sank into cold mud. Behind her, 6-year-old Etta was crying. Not loud, just a thin, exhausted whimper, the kind of crying a child does when she's too tired to be scared properly. "It's all right," Clara said, though her voice cracked on the second word. "We're all right." She was lying. They both knew it. The wheel was shattered beyond fixing. The nearest town, according to the man who'd sold her the wagon 3 days ago in Cheyenne, was Larchper Hollow, another 8 miles north, maybe more in the dark. She had $11 left, a busted trunk, a tired horse, and a little girl who hadn't eaten since noon. Clara pressed her palm flat against the wagon's splintered side, the way she used to press her hand against her husband's chest, back when he still had a heartbeat to feel. 3 months a widow now. 3 months of learning that grief doesn't kill you. It just follows you, patient as a shadow, waiting for you to slow down. She would not slow down, not with Etta watching. That was when she saw the light. Small, steady, half a mile off, through a break in the cottonwoods, a single window, glowing amber against the coming dark. "Stay close to me," Clara whispered, taking Etta's hand. The ranch house sat low and square against the hillside, the kind of house built by a man who cared more about keeping warm than looking pretty. A barn stood beside it, bigger than the house itself, its doors chained shut for the night. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A dog barked twice, then went quiet. The door opened before Clara even reached the porch steps. He was tall, the kind of tall that made doorways look smaller, with shoulders built from years of hard, honest work. His shirt was faded blue, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and his hands, Clara noticed even in the poor light, were scarred and rough, a rancher's hands. He had maybe 30 years on him, maybe less. Hard living aged a man fast out here. His eyes found Clara first, then dropped to Etta. Something in his face shifted, just slightly, like a door easing open a crack. "Evening," he said. "Just that. Nothing more." "I'm sorry to trouble you," Clara said quickly. "Our wagon broke down on the road. I don't mean to impose. I only—" "You walk here?" "Half a mile, maybe." He looked past her, toward the dark road, then back at Etta, who was clutching her mother's skirt with both fists, her small face pale with cold. "Storm's coming in from the west," he said. "You can't be out in that with a child." Clara opened her mouth to argue. Pride, mostly, the last thing she had left, but he was already stepping back from the door, holding it open. "Come in. Get warm. I'll see about your wagon come morning." "I couldn't ask you to." "You didn't ask." A faint, tired smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I offered." His name was Jonah Cole, and his house smelled like wood smoke and coffee and leather oil. There wasn't much furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed visible through a half-open door, but the fire was built high, and within minutes Etta was sitting close to it, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled like horses and hay, finally warm enough to stop shivering. Jonah didn't ask many questions. He set a pot of beans back on the stove, cut thick slices of bread, and put a plate in front of Etta without a word, like feeding strangers was simply something a person did out here, the way you'd offer water to a thirsty animal. "Where you headed?" he asked finally, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Larchper Hollow," Clara said. "My husband's cousin has land there." He said we could stay till I found work. Said. Clara's throat tightened. He passed. Before we left Ohio. I didn't know until we'd already gone. Something moved behind Jonah's eyes. Not pity, exactly. Recognition. The look of a man who understood, in his bones, what it meant to arrive somewhere and find only silence where you'd expected a welcome. Larkspur's a hard 8 miles, even with a good wagon, he said. Yours ain't good no more. I know. Clara looked down at her hands. I'll figure something out. You will, he agreed. Not tonight, though. He straightened, walked to the window, glanced out at the dark. Wind was picking up, rattling the glass in its frame. I got a barn, he said. Loft's dry. Got clean straw, a couple old quilts. Ain't fancy, but it'll keep the wind off you till your wagon's fixed. Clara stared at him. You don't know us. No, Jonah said simply. But I know what a woman with a child looks like when she's got nowhere else to go. Seen it before. He paused, something old and unspoken passing behind his eyes. Barn's warmer than the road. Etta fell asleep before Clara finished thanking him. Curled up on the wool blanket by the fire, breathing slow and even for the first time in days. Clara sat watching her daughter's face in the firelight, and for a moment, just a moment, she let herself feel the exhaustion she'd been holding back for 300 miles. Jonah noticed. He always seemed to notice things without staring. You've been carrying her a long way, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Longer than the road, Clara admitted, before she could stop herself. He didn't press. He simply nodded, like he understood there were some things you didn't ask a stranger, not on the first night. Instead, he banked the fire, fetched 2 more quilts from a trunk near his bed, and carried a lantern out toward the barn to light the way. Careful on the ladder, he said, holding the barn door open against the wind. Rungs are old. Clara carried Etta up into the loft, laid her down in the straw, and pulled the quilts close around them both. Through a gap in the boards, she could see the house, one window, still glowing amber, where Jonah Cole sat awake a while longer, as if making sure the light stayed lit until he was certain they'd truly settled. She didn't know his story yet. She didn't know about the woman's dress still folded in his trunk, the one he never spoke of. She didn't know why a man alone on 100 acres kept a spare chair at his table, or why his hands went still every time when Etta laughed. All she knew was this. For the first time in 3 months, she had stopped being afraid of the dark. The wind howled against the barn boards. Somewhere below, a horse shifted in its stall, and Clara Whitfield, widow, mother, stranger in a hard land, closed her eyes and slept, not knowing that the man in that house had just made a promise to himself, standing alone by his fire. He would not let this woman and her daughter walk back out into a world that had already taken everything from them. He just didn't know yet how much it would cost him to keep that promise or how much it would give him back. Because by morning, everything about Jonah Cole's quiet, empty life was about to change. And neither of them had any idea how far this storm would carry them. Morning came gray and quiet. The storm spent, the world outside coated in a thin skin of frost. Clara woke to the sound of hammering. She climbed down from the loft to find Jonah already outside, sleeves rolled up despite the cold, working on her wagon wheel with the kind of focused men usually reserved for prayer. He'd hauled the whole busted axle into the yard before sunup, with shavings curled around his boots. Didn't have to start so early, Clara said, hugging her shawl tighter. Didn't sleep much, Jonah said, not looking up. Figured I might as well be useful. It wasn't the whole truth. Clara could see that in the shadows under his eyes. But she didn't push. Strangers didn't ask each other why they lay awake at night. Not yet, anyway. Etta appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, wrapped in the same wool blanket, watching Jonah work with the solemn curiosity only a 6-year-old could manage. She didn't approach. She just watched, the way a stray cat watches a stranger before deciding whether to come closer. Jonah noticed. He always noticed. "You like horses?" he asked, without turning around. Etta nodded, small and quick. "Got one that could use some carrots. If your mama says it's all right." Clara looked at her daughter's face, the first flicker of brightness she'd seen in weeks, and nodded before Etta even had to ask. That was how it started, not with grand words, with carrots and a gray mare named Biscuit and a little girl's laugh finally breaking through 3 months of silence like sunlight through a cracked door. The wagon wheel, it turned out, was worse than either of them first thought. The axle had split clean through, and Jonah didn't have the right iron to fix it proper. That meant a trip to Larkspur Hollow for supplies, a full day's ride there and back. "I could take you along," he offered that evening, over a supper of stew and cornbread. "Drop you at your cousin's place directly." Clara hesitated. "I rode ahead, told him we'd be arriving by wagon within the week. If I show up early on a stranger's horse, unannounced?" She shook her head. "It isn't proper." Jonah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Out here, ma'am, proper's a luxury. Most folks are just grateful to be alive come spring." "Even so," Clara folded her hands. "If it isn't too much trouble, we'll wait for the wagon. I don't want to be a burden longer than necessary." Something crossed Jonah's face then, quick, gone almost before it arrived. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. Clara couldn't tell which, and she told herself it didn't matter. It mattered more than she wanted to admit. 3 days passed, then 4. Clara found herself falling into a rhythm she hadn't expected. Waking early to help with the chickens, mending a tear in Jonah's spare coat while he split firewood, watching Etta trail after him through the barn like a small, devoted shadow. He taught her how to whistle for the mare. He let her name the barn cat's kittens, all 5 of them, absurd names like Thunder and Miss Biscuit II. He was patient with her in a way Clara hadn't seen in a man before. Not even her late husband, who had loved Etta fiercely but clumsily, the way men sometimes love children they don't quite know how to talk to. Jonah talked to Etta like she mattered, like her opinions on kittens and horses carried real weight in the world. Clara watched this from the porch one afternoon, arms crossed over her chest, and felt something crack open inside her. Not sorrow this time. Something gentler. Something she didn't have a name for yet. That evening, after Etta had fallen asleep in the loft, Clara found Jonah sitting alone by the fire, turning a small object over and over in his hands. She almost didn't ask, but the firelight caught something in his face, an old grief, worn smooth like river stone, and the question came out before she could stop it. Who was she? Jonah went still. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he opened his hand, and Clara saw what he'd been holding. A woman's hair comb, simple, carved from bone, one tooth broken. "Margaret," he said quietly. "My wife. Was. 2 winters back." His voice stayed level, the way a man's voice does when he's had a long time to practice keeping it that way. "Childbed fever. Took her and the boy both, 3 days apart." He turned the comb over once more, then closed his fist around it. "Built that barn loft for a nursery, if you want the truth of it. Never got used the way I meant it to." Clara's breath caught. Suddenly the empty chair at the table, the spare quilts folded with such careful precision, the way Jonah's hands stilled every time Etta laughed. All of it rearranged itself into a shape she understood now, painfully well. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know. Wasn't asking for sorry." Jonah looked up, and his eyes, in the firelight, were unbearably honest. "Just seemed to lie, letting you sleep under my roof without knowing why an empty house like this ever got built so big." Clara didn't have words for what she felt then, so she simply sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and let the fire fill the silence between them. Neither one moved away. It was the following afternoon when the rider came. Clara heard the hoofbeats before she saw him. A big man on a bigger horse, moving up the road at a pace that spoke of business, not friendship. Jonah stepped out onto the porch, and something in his posture changed instantly, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening. "Boone," he said low, like the name itself tasted bad. Silas Boone was broad where Jonah was lean, dressed in a coat too fine for ranch work, with a mustache waxed to sharp points and eyes that moved over the property like a man counting up what he already believed belonged to him. "Cole." Boone didn't dismount. His gaze slid to Clara, standing near the door, then to Etta peeking out from behind her skirts, and something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Didn't know you had company. Wagon trouble," Jonah said flatly. "None of your concern. Everything on this land is my concern, Cole, long as you're still sitting on my note." Boone's smile didn't reach his eyes. "First snow's coming early this year. Bank in Larkspur's asking questions about that loan your daddy took out. You recall the terms, I trust." Jonah's hands curled slowly into fists at his sides. "I recall." "Good." Boone finally swung down from his horse, boots striking the frozen ground hard. "Because I'm prepared to be generous, old friend. Extend the note another season." He paused, savoring it. "For the right consideration. I already told you my answer. Circumstances change." Boone's eyes flicked toward Clara again, lingering a beat too long. "Man living alone out here, struggling to keep up a spread this size. Folks talk, Cole. Then again." He smiled thinly. "Looks like maybe you ain't so alone no more." The air went sharp and cold. Clara felt Etta's small hand tighten around her own. Jonah stepped between Boone and the porch, voice low and hard as iron. "Say your business plain, or get off my land." Boone chuckled, unbothered, already turning back toward his horse. "First snow, Cole. That's my business. You know where to find me before then, with the money or with something else worth my while." He swung up into the saddle, tipped his hat toward Clara with mocking politeness. "Ma'am." He rode off without waiting for a reply, dust and frost kicking up behind him. Jonah stood in the yard a long moment, breathing hard, fists still clenched. When he finally turned back toward the house, his face had gone pale beneath the weather-beaten tan. "Jonah." Clara's voice was careful. "What note? What does he mean, first snow?" Jonah didn't answer right away. He walked past her into the house, pulled open a drawer near the window, and withdrew a folded paper, worn soft at the creases from being read too many times. "My father borrowed against the land before he died," he said finally. "Boone's bank holds the note. Comes due first snowfall. 3 weeks, maybe less, way that sky's looking to." He set the paper down on the table like it weighed more than it should. "I don't have the money. What happens if you can't pay?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "Boone forecloses. Takes the ranch. Takes the barn." He looked up, and something in his eyes made Clara's chest ache. "Takes everything my father built. Everything I got left of Margaret and the boy." Clara opened her mouth to say something. Comfort, reassurance, she didn't know what, when the sound of another rider approaching stopped her cold. This one came fast, urgent, a boy no older than 14 on a lathered horse, calling out before he'd even reached the yard. "Mrs. Whitfield. Are you Mrs. Clara Whitfield?" Clara's stomach dropped. "Yes, I'm Clara Whitfield." The boy pulled his horse up hard, chest heaving. "Telegraph office in Larkspur Hollow sent me, ma'am. Message came in for you 2 days back, marked urgent." He fumbled a folded paper from his coat, held it out with a trembling hand. "About your late husband's family, ma'am. Said it's real important you read it right away." Clara's fingers went numb as she took the paper. Jonah watched her face carefully, the note about Boone and the ranch momentarily forgotten. She unfolded the telegram with shaking hands, and as her eyes moved across the words, All the color drained from her face. Clara. Jonah stepped closer. What is it? Clara looked up at him, and for the first time since the night her wagon wheel broke, real fear moved behind her eyes. They know where we are, she whispered. They're coming for Etta. Coming for her? Jonah's voice went hard and quiet. Who's coming for her, Clara? Clara couldn't speak at first. She read the telegram again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less terrible. William Whitfield S.R. and wife departing by rail stop arriving Larkspur Hollow within the week stop intend to petition court for custody of granddaughter Etta stop claim widow unfit to provide stop lawyer retained stop. My husband's parents, Clara finally managed. They never approved of me. Thought their son married beneath him. When he died, they wrote once, offered to take Etta and give her a proper life. Her hands trembled around the paper. I refused. I thought that was the end of it. And now I have $11, a broken wagon, and no home of my own. Her voice cracked on the last word. A judge won't see a mother fighting for her daughter, Jonah. He'll see exactly what they want him to see, a poor widow with nothing, against a wealthy family who can give Etta everything I can't. Jonah's eyes moved to Etta, who stood frozen in the doorway, too young to understand the words but old enough to feel the fear in the room. He crossed to her, knelt down slow, the way he always did, so he wasn't looming over her. Nothing to worry on, little one, he said gently. Go on and check on Biscuit for me. See if she needs more hay. Etta hesitated, glancing at her mother, then nodded and slipped outside, small boots crunching over frost. Only when the door clicked shut did Jonah turn back to Clara, and something had settled in his face, not fear. Resolve. They ain't talking that child, he said. You don't understand how these things work. Money talks louder than love in a courtroom. Maybe. Jonah's jaw tightened. But love's what's going to be standing in that courtroom looking the judge dead in the eye. That's worth something, too. That night, after Etta was asleep, Clara sat at Jonah's table with a pencil and a scrap of paper, trying to calculate impossible math. How a woman with $11 could hire a lawyer, prove a home, prove stability, prove she was fit to keep the only piece of her husband that still breathed. Jonah sat across from her, silent for a long while, watching the fire instead of her. Marry me, he said finally. Clara's pencil stopped moving. What? Not for foolish reasons. His voice was steady, though his hands, folded on the table, were not quite still. You need a home the court can't argue with. Land. A name. A husband willing to swear before God and judge both that you're the finest mother he's ever seen. He finally met her eyes. And he stopped, started again. I need this house to be a home again. Been empty a long time, Clara. Longer than just these 2 winters. Jonah, you barely know me. Know enough. A ghost of a smile. Know you walked 8 miles in the cold rather than let your girl see you scared. Know you meant a man's coat without being asked. And you don't complain about a barn loft when plenty of women would have turned right back around. He leaned forward slightly. Know that little girls laugh more in this house in 4 days than most children laugh in a month, way she tells it. Know I look forward to waking up now, first time in 2 years. Clara's eyes burned. This isn't a fairy tale. Boone's coming for your land. My husband's parents are coming for my daughter. You'd be taking on 2 problems, not solving them. Then we solve them together. Jonah reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, leaving the choice entirely hers. I ain't a skin for romance you don't feel yet, Clara. I'm a skin for a chance. Give this, he gestured at the house, the fire, the quiet. Give this a season to become something real. If by spring it hasn't, I'll never speak another word about it, and I'll still stand beside you in that courtroom regardless. Clara looked at his open, waiting hand. Outside, the wind had gone still for the first time in days. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. By spring, she whispered. The wedding was small. A circuit preacher passing through Larkspur Hollow, 2 neighbors as witnesses, Etta clutching a handful of dried wildflowers Jonah had helped her gather from beneath the frost. It wasn't romance, not yet, exactly what Jonah had promised. It was something steadier, a foundation being laid, board by careful board. Boone came the very next week, expecting to find a desperate rancher alone and out of options. He found instead a married man with a wife's dowry, modest but enough, combined with what Jonah had saved, to cover half the note, and 3 neighboring ranchers standing in the yard beside him, men who'd known Jonah's father, men who remembered what kind of family the Coles had always been to folks in trouble. "We're paying the note in full, Boone," Jonah said, holding out a leather pouch heavy with coin the neighbors had pooled together overnight. Once word got around about what Boone had tried to do. Every penny before first snow, like the terms said. Boone's mustache twitched, his calculating smile faltering as he counted the coin, then looked around at the ring of hard, unfriendly faces surrounding him. "This ranch was never going to be worth what you think, Cole," he muttered, snatching the pouch. "Funny." Jonah's voice was calm, almost pleasant now that the fight was won. "Seems like plenty of folks around here disagree." Boone rode off that afternoon and never came back. Clara's in-laws arrived 3 days later, in a hired carriage entirely too fine for the muddy road leading to Jonah's ranch, dressed like they'd stepped out of a Boston parlor rather than a Montana winter. William Whitfield Sr. was a stiff, silver-haired man with his son's jaw and none of his son's warmth. His wife, Margaret, a cruel echo of a name Jonah still carried grief for, looked at the ranch house with open disdain before she'd even stepped down from the carriage. "Mrs. Whitfield," the old man said coldly, "we've come to discuss our granddaughter's future." "It's Mrs. Cole now," Jonah said, stepping up beside Clara, one hand resting steady at the small of her back. "And Etta's future's already settled. Right here." William's eyes swept over the ranch, the barn, Jonah himself, with obvious skepticism. "A hasty marriage to a rancher of no particular means hardly constitutes stability, sir." "Funny you'd speak of stability," Jonah said evenly, "seeing as your own son never once wrote you a letter in the 3 years I hear till he was married, and you never once visited your granddaughter till she became useful to your family name." William's face went red. "How dare, Grandpa?" Every head turned. Etta stood in the barn doorway, mittened hands clutching the frame, Biscuit's lead rope still looped over one small wrist. She looked at the stern, unfamiliar couple with the frank curiosity of a child who had never once been taught to be afraid of honesty. "Are you the ones Mama's scared of?" she asked plainly. "You don't gotta be scary. We got extra hay if your horses are cold. And kittens. You want to see the kittens?" Silence fell over the yard. Even William Whitfield Sr., a man Clara had never once seen at a loss for words, seemed to have none. Margaret, the grandmother, stepped forward first, something shifting behind her sharp eyes as she studied her granddaughter properly for the first time. Rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed, radiating the particular, unmistakable glow of a child who is deeply, thoroughly loved. "You look well, child," she said, quieter now. "I am well." Etta beamed. "Papa Jonah taught me to whistle. Want to hear?" Papa Jonah. Clara's breath caught. Beside her, she felt Jonah go completely still, his hand tightening ever so slightly against her back. Not from surprise, she realized. From something far deeper. Something that had been waiting 2 long winters to be spoken aloud by a child's careless, joyful voice. William Whitfield Sr. looked at his granddaughter's shining face, at the sturdy ranch house behind her, at the unmistakable devotion written plainly across the rough-handed rancher standing guard beside his daughter-in-law, and something in his rigid posture finally, quietly broke. "We'll not be filing any petition," he said stiffly, though his voice had lost its earlier ice. "It seems she is already home." He left an hour later, promising letters, promising a visit come summer. Promises Clara suspected for the first time he might actually intend to keep. Etta waved until the carriage disappeared over the ridge, then ran straight back to the barn to introduce the kittens to no one in particular, simply too happy to keep the joy contained. Spring came slow to Montana territory, the way it always did. Reluctant, then all at once, snow melt rushing down the hillsides, the first green pushing up stubborn and bright through soil that had seemed frozen forever. Clara stood on the porch one morning in April, watching Jonah teach Etta to plant seeds and careful, even rows behind the barn, his big scarred hands guiding her small ones into the soft turned earth. Sunlight fell warm across them both. Somewhere behind her, inside the house, a kettle had just begun to sing. She thought about the night her wagon wheel broke, the terror of the dark road, the cold, the certainty that she and Etta were entirely alone in the world with nothing but $11 and a splintered axle between them, and disaster. She thought about the man who had opened his door without asking a single question first. Jonah looked up just then, catching her watching him, and something passed between them across the yard. Quiet, certain, entirely without need for words. He smiled, the way he only ever smiled now, easy and unguarded, and went back to helping Etta pat down the last of the soil around a tiny green seedling. Clara pressed her hand flat against the porch post, the wood warm beneath her palm, and understood, finally, completely, that she was no longer just a widow who had wandered into a stranger's barn seeking shelter from the cold. She was home, and somewhere out past the fence line, where the barn shadow stretched long and gentle across new spring grass, a man who had once built a nursery for a child he'd lost was now, at long last, watching a little girl who was entirely, unmistakably his. Plant something green and living in the ground where once there had been nothing left but frost.